This is my video update from Moscow, Russia on this Monday morning, July the 24th. Let's talk about some news on this rainy summer day here in Moscow. I am at the Krasny Varota metro station, and this beautiful Moscow tree is protecting me from the rain. And so I figured this would be a good spot to knock out a video. And we have some big news from the front lines in Ukraine. We have a counteroffensive breakthrough. Defensive lines have collapsed. The military is advancing. And it looks like we finally have the summer offensive breakthrough that we have all been waiting for, that we have all been discussing, analyzing, and talking about. Unfortunately, for the Zelensky regime, this breakthrough is coming from the Russian military. It is the Russian military in the Svatovo region, in the Kharkov area, that have broken through Ukraine defensive lines. The last reports that I have read is that the Ukraine military is retreating in the Svatovo area. They're actually retreating over the Oskol River to the other side of the Oskol River, and the Russian military has advanced around 5 kilometers, and some reports have even claimed that the Russian military is now crossing over the Oskol River. A complete collapse in the Ukraine defensive line, the fortifications in the Kharkov region, and there is talk that the Zelensky regime is now in a panic and they are moving resources from the Zaporozhye region to try and stop the Russian advance. And the big question is whether the Russians will indeed advance further, or if this is just a type of, I guess you would say, a pinning operation where the Russians have advanced significantly in order to draw Ukraine resources away from the Zaporozhye area and to further stretch out the Ukraine military resources. So we will see in the next day or two exactly what the military plan, what the objective is for the Russian military as they are breaking through the Ukraine defenses in the Kharkov region. So we have a successful counteroffensive, and it is coming from the Russian military, not from the Ukraine military. This is very, very bad news for the Zelensky regime and for the collective West. So we can now talk about what the Zelensky regime is doing in response to the failures of the big spring, summer, winter, fall, summer counteroffensive. What the Zelensky regime is doing is that they are sending drones into Crimea. They are sending drones into Moscow, and they're trying to, I guess you could say, to wage a war of fear and terror for this spring offensive. The military has not been able to advance. It is stuck in the front lines in Ukraine, and so the Zelensky regime and their NATO handlers have decided that what they can do is that they can send drone attacks into Crimea and into Moscow to try and create some sort of fear or panic inside of Russia. And so yesterday, we had a significant number of drones that were sent into Crimea. 17 drones is the last report that I have received, and all of those 17 drones were either shot down or brought down by electronic means. I believe there were no casualties, but this was a pretty large drone strike that was sent towards Crimea. And we also had drones that were sent towards Moscow around 4 in the morning, Moscow time. We had some drones that hit a residential. Is it a residential or commercial building? They hit a high rise. Let me see if I have it bookmarked. A residential high rise is what they hit. Minimal damage, according to Russian officials, according to the Moscow mayor, and no casualties. But you had drones that were sent towards the city of Moscow. So the Zelensky regime, realizing that they cannot win this conflict, that they are stuck in a stalemate in the south region, in the Zaporozhye Kherson region. They're losing ground, significant ground in Kharkov. They've fallen back on drone strikes in Crimea and Moscow. And I believe the Ukraine intel services, in order to try and drive fear into the Russian population, they came out with a statement and said that more drone strikes are coming. So Maria Zakharova, the Russian Foreign Ministry, they have responded to the drone strikes in Crimea and in Moscow. And Maria Zakharova, speaking to RTV1, she said that these drone strikes are a terrorist attack against Moscow. She actually said it's an act of international terrorism against Moscow. So an interesting choice of words from the Russian Foreign Ministry, an international terrorist attack towards Moscow. Now, yesterday, you also had the Russian Ministry of Defense. They said that they launched more missile attacks towards the Odessa port. They have completely decimated and degraded the Odessa port, at least 2 of the port areas. From what I understand, there's a third port area which has not been hit yet, but the 2 port areas in Odessa have been completely decimated. I believe we're on like 5 or 6 days now where the Russian military continues to hit at the port in Odessa since the grain deal fell apart. So there's a lot of panic and a lot of finger pointing from the collective West with regards to the failed counteroffensive, and we have a whole bunch of articles and statements connected to the failed counteroffensive that came out yesterday. And some of these statements are pretty far out there and pretty interesting. For example, Secretary of State, U.S. Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, he told CNN yesterday that Ukraine has retaken 50% of the territory that Russia seized. Blinken said that the counteroffensive is going to be slow and it's going to be costly for the Ukraine military. It's going to be costly. He did say that Putin's objectives in Ukraine have not been accomplished. He actually said to CNN that the Russians have already lost. We have a post from the Kiev Post, and they came out with an article interviewing Ukraine soldiers on the front line, and the title of their article is "Every 100 meters costs 4 to 5 men. Ukraine's frontline fighters report bloody battles and battered morale." That's the title from an article published by the Kiev Post. Every 100 meters costs 4 to 5 men. I think the Kiev Post is actually, as horrific as this sounds, I think the Kiev Post is even downplaying this. That's how bad it is for the Zelensky regime. I think the Kiev Post is putting a very low number on the actual cost for the Ukraine military with regards to whatever territory they managed to gain. And the 100 meters that they gain, which the Kiev Post says is costing them 4 to 5 men, they gain 100 meters and they lose 150 meters. And then they gain 100 meters and then they lose 100 meters. They're gaining nothing. So it's costing them 4 to 5 men, according to the Kiev Post. I think that they're lowballing the number, but it's costing them, these men, for essentially zero territorial gains. That's the reality of the situation. Not to mention all of the military hardware and military resources that have also been lost in this counteroffensive, which has gained no territory and has resulted in a successful Russian breakthrough in Kharkov. And we also have an interesting statement from Zelensky. Zelensky said some interesting things the other day with regards to the failure of the counteroffensive. Zelensky, he said that the counteroffensive has failed because the collective West, or better for me to say, the counteroffensive has not succeeded. The counteroffensive has not succeeded, in Zelensky's words, because the collective West failed to properly train the Ukraine military. That's what Zelensky is now saying is the reason for the stall in the counteroffensive. Quote, "We did have plans to start the counteroffensive in spring, but we didn't because, frankly, we had not enough munitions and armaments and not enough brigades properly trained in these weapons. It was this delay that allowed Russia to mine all our lands and build several lines of defense, forcing upon the Ukraine military a slower pace of our counteroffensive actions. We don't want to lose our people, our personnel," Zelensky said, adding, "Our servicemen didn't want to lose equipment because of that." Zelensky, 3 months ago, in an interview with the BBC, he said that Ukraine did not want to launch a counteroffensive in the spring. He actually said that Ukraine would rather launch a counteroffensive later on in the summer, or even towards the fall, towards September. I believe Zelensky actually said towards September would be optimal would be better for Ukraine to launch a counteroffensive. But Zelensky did tell the BBC that Ukraine is not prepared to launch a counteroffensive in the spring, and that the collective West should stop pushing them to launch a counteroffensive. Then in June, Zelensky said that he wanted to launch the counteroffensive in the spring. He was eager to launch a counteroffensive in springtime, but it was the collective West that caused the delays because they weren't giving him the weapons and the F-16s and the tanks that he needed. And now you have Zelensky saying that, yes, he wanted to launch the counteroffensive in the spring, but they got the weapons, but unfortunately the Ukraine troops were not trained to use those weapons. He actually said in this interview that training the Ukraine military in Europe caused a whole bunch of delays. It would have been better to train the Ukraine military in Ukraine. It would have caused less delays, and it's all these delays that gave the Russians the opportunity to build fortifications. Even though we knew that Russia was building fortifications 3, 4, 5 months ago, this was no secret. I think the entire world knew that the Russians were building fortifications in Zaporozhye and Kherson. This was not kept secret. We had satellite imagery. We had tons of articles from Russian publications, from Collective West publications, from Ukraine publications. We had Twitter posts. We had Telegram posts. Everyone knew that Russia was building fortifications for many, many months. Everyone knew it. I mean, there were articles saying Russia is placing mines in Zaporozhye and Kherson. And there was like satellite imagery of like the Russians placing mines in Zaporozhye and Kherson. This was no secret. Zelensky he's trying to paint the picture that, if it wasn't for this 1.5 month delay, then the Russians would have never had time to fortify these areas and to place mines, and then we would have been able to just quickly make a quick run to the Sea of Azov, because there wouldn't have been mined areas, and it would have been a whole lot easier for us to launch this counteroffensive. That's the picture that Zelensky is trying to paint, or at least that's the script that he's been given to read. So yeah, it's nonsense. It's nonsense. The entire collective West, NATO, the Ukraine military, me, you, everybody, we all knew that Russia was building up fortifications in this area. We all knew that Ukraine was going to launch an offensive in this area 6 months ago. That's all they talked about. We're going to launch an offensive to the Sea of Azov, and then to get to Crimea, to capture Crimea. They've been talking about that since like January. All of a sudden, the narrative has changed, and Zelensky and the collective West, they're trying to rewrite history in a way, when we know what was said, we know what was written, we know what was reported. So this new narrative of a 1 month delay led to the failed counteroffensive is nonsense. It's nonsense. Those Russian fortifications were ready a long time ago, and the Russians were just waiting. I remember I remember reporting on this in May and June. Everyone was just kind of waiting. The Russian fortifications were pretty much built, and everyone's like, when is this counteroffensive going to happen? And people are just waiting. People were waiting and waiting and waiting, and that was the reality of the situation. So let's see. The Wall Street Journal, they put out an interesting article, and I'm going to read you a tweet from, let me pull it up here, Max Abrams, who says, "This is as close to an admission you're ever going to find that the establishment has been lying to you massively about the Ukraine war." And this is the title from the Wall Street Journal. "Ukraine's lack of weaponry and training risks stalemate in fight with Russia. US and Kiev knew of shortfalls, but Kiev still launched the offensive. When Ukraine launched its big counteroffensive this spring, Western military officials knew Kiev didn't have all the training or weapons, from shells to warplanes, that it needed to dislodge Russian forces. But they hoped Ukrainian courage and resourcefulness would carry the day. They haven't. The United States, NATO, they knew that Ukraine was not going to be successful, but Kiev wanted to go through with the offensive nonetheless. And the Wall Street Journal makes it seem like the U.S. said, okay, go for it, launch your counteroffensive, and maybe your courage and resourcefulness will be enough. That's pretty much what the Wall Street Journal is saying. And let me read you a quote from a U.S. military official. This is what John Nagel, a retired U.S. Army lieutenant colonel, told the Wall Street Journal. "America would never attempt to defeat a prepared defense without air superiority, but the Ukrainians don't have air superiority. It's impossible to overstate how important air superiority is for fighting a ground fight at a reasonable cost in casualties." This all sounds to me like a whole lot of blame game going around. A lot of finger pointing. A lot of finger pointing going around. But whether you take Zelensky's statements, whether you You look at what the Kiev Post is writing, whether you look at what the Wall Street Journal is reporting or what this U.S. Military official is saying, it all points to one conclusion, which is that the Ukraine military and this counteroffensive has indeed failed. It's failed. It's not going to succeed. That's just the bottom line. So let's discuss casualties then, since this U.S. military official talked about casualties. Russian President Vladimir Putin, he was in a meeting with Lukashenko over the weekend, and he said that Ukraine has indeed suffered in this counteroffensive. Just in this counteroffensive from June 4th up until today, Ukraine has indeed suffered 26,000 casualties. So Putin, he has repeated the line that the number that the Russian Ministry of Defense has put out there. He's confirmed this number of 26,000 casualties, and Putin also said that a lot of mercenaries have also died in this counteroffensive. And he said that what the mercenaries have been doing in Ukraine, and the reason for their annihilation in Ukraine, Putin said it's because they are acting stupid. It's because of their stupidity in fighting the Russians, their stupidity in believing that they could defeat the Russian military, their stupidity in supporting Ukraine. Putin basically said that what the mercenaries from the West are doing in Ukraine is stupid, but they've suffered heavy losses, according to the Russian president. He also said that the public in the collective West, they're going to learn about all of the mercenaries that have died fighting in Ukraine. Putin said, and I quote, "The public in the countries whose governments send people to the war zone is aware of what is actually happening on the battlefield in Ukraine." And Putin pledged, "We will inform people so that they can evaluate the actions of their governments." It's an interesting statement from the Russian president. So let's go for, should we go for a walk in the rain a little bit? And we can do a couple of more stories. Or we can do one more story, a quick update on the elections in Spain, and then we can do a clown world. So let me, if you guys don't mind, I've got my Duran hoodie here, and let's go for a walk. The flag of Kenya. That is my Duran hoodie. And I think the phone is all right. I have learned since my adventures in Yerevan that the iPhone can handle rain and water very well. Remember, I talked about the Stalin Seven Sisters, the buildings that Stalin built throughout Moscow. Here's another one at the Krasny Varota metro stop. I believe this is residential, like these are apartments that you can rent. That would be a cool place to live. So let's talk about the elections in Spain real quick. Spain did have elections, and we have a stalemate in Spain. The ruling government, I think they improved their position by 2 seats in the parliament, the Sanchez government. But the government, the party that is considered to be conservative right, I believe it's the Popular Party. So you have the Workers' Party, which is the ruling government, which is Sanchez, and then I think you have the Popular Party. They got the most parliament seats, I think like 136, and the Sanchez government got something like, the Sanchez party got something like 124, if I remember. And neither of the two big parties can form a government. And even with some coalition partners, it's going to be difficult for either side, whether left or right, to form a government. So we're in a kind of deadlock as far as the Spanish elections are concerned. And the conservative right Popular Party, they're thinking of teaming up with Vox, which from what I read actually did worse this election than the last election, but they still have enough seats to be the number 3 party. But even if they're combined with the conservative right, they still don't have enough seats, 176 seats to form a government. The ruling government of Sanchez, the Workers' Party, they're thinking of combining with the party led by gosh, what's his name? The guy that's like on the run because he was I forgot his name. Because he was pushing for Catalonia independence. Well, his party is probably the best option for Sanchez to team up with and form a coalition. But even that's not enough for Sanchez to remain in power. So it looks like it's a pretty big mess in Spain. Very, very divided. Very divided in Spain. And we'll see how things shake out. The last I read is that this deadlock could remain up until the fall. And you may have to have new elections because it doesn't look like either side is going to be able to form a coalition. So that is the update from Spain. Let's now do a clown world. And we have in this clown world a social media influencer who traveled to Ukraine in order to provide emotional support to the foreign fighters, to mercenaries. And she's calling herself, or at least they're calling her, an emotional support stripper. That is what her job title is. From social media influencer to emotional support stripper. Taiwanese American influencer Fan Pei Kwang traveled from her native Houston to the front lines of the Ukrainian conflict to offer her services as an emotional support stripper, she told the Daily Beast on Friday. The beauty pageant contestant turned self-described globe-trotting girlfriend offers racy photos of herself in skimpy variations of military gear, posing with armaments on erotic pay-per-view platform OnlyFans. Though she says the content is free to Ukrainian soldiers and volunteers, that's not the only thing for free. According to her profile on the DIY Prawn site, which lists free emotional breastfeeding to soldiers and volunteers as one of her specialties. Look, basically, the article goes on and talks about this only simps or only fans influencer, how she's in Ukraine and how she's providing services to foreign fighters. Let's just leave it at that. I don't really think I need to go into any more detail. She actually says that she's dating like four soldiers as well, whatever that means. She dates 4 foreign soldiers who have volunteered their own services to the Ukrainian cause, she said. Yeah, well, she calls it emotional support stripper. There's other words that you can use to describe the services that she's providing anyway. That's the clown world, everybody. Oh man. It's a gimmick. It's a gimmick for her to get more OnlyFans subscribers. That's all this is. That's all this is. Anyway, thedurand.locals.com. We are on Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Telegram, and Rockfin. And go to the Durand shop. Pick up a hoodie, 10% off. Use the code. Good day. Take care.